So welcome everyone to the first edition of the Zoracle SpotOn Chat. And I'm here today with Rebecca Monet, and she is the founder and the president of Zoracle Profiles. Rebecca has been in the franchise industry since 1993, doing the exact same thing that she's doing now. And she has developed some really amazing tools for franchisors and franchise brokers, and we are going to do an entire series of conversations, or chats if you will, about how that all works and the science behind what it is that she does. Welcome, Rebecca. We're so glad to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Bonnie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I am so glad to have you here, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of personality tests and what's the difference between a personality test and the assessment that you do. What exactly is a personality test?
Good question. Actually, some of the history of personality tests is very interesting. It goes all the way back to Sir Francis Galton in 1884. And his thought was that we could learn about personality traits by looking at people's language, how they spoke, the words that they might use. So he created this hypothesis that said, let's look at the words and see if indeed they do reflect a bit about someone's personality. So a little bit later, actually many years later, in 1936, Gordon Allport decided he would test Galton's hypothesis, and he went to basically a dictionary, the dictionary of the time, and he pulled out over 18,000 adjectives that he felt were related to personality traits. And then he sort of whittled that down to about 4,500 adjectives that he believed described in an observable way and in a permanent way someone's personality. We have to remember, however, that 1936 language is very different than 2014 language, and even words, the meanings have changed during that time. Mm-hmm. And then one of his colleagues, Raymond Cattell, who was a psychologist originally, I believe, from England, took that whole idea and decided to whittle it down even more. So it went from 18,000 words to 4,500 words, down to getting rid of all the synonyms, and now they were down to 181 words they believed clustered together in a way that describes somebody's personality. So from that came kind of the first personality test called the 16 Personality Factor Questionnaire. So these clusters, basically these 181 words or adjectives were then clustered into 16 personality traits. Do you remember, Bonnie, ever taking one of those 16 Personality Factor Questionnaires when you were in high school or college?
You know, I've taken several different ones over time. I think the one that stands out in my mind is the one where they talk about the owl, the turtle, and the hare, and I don't know. There were 4 different animals or something that were your personality things. And I always kind of thought that they seemed a little general until I then started cross-breeding them and saying, okay, well, you're a turtle owl or, you know, whatever. But
right.
Quite frankly, I was never all that clear on exactly how they worked or what they did.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the challenges with personality tests is where Cattell was going with the 16 personality factors. If you could describe everyone in 16 factors, it does kind of generalize things, as you were mentioning. But here's what's even weirder about all that. This is why, you know, we at Zoracle just are anti-personality tests, at least in the world of franchising, if you want to predict performance. But The world of personality tests went a little bit further a few years later and actually determined out of that 181-word personality factor questionnaire that there were really only 5 consistent factors that could be measurable over a person's lifetime. Because remember, what we're looking for, personality tests, what they're looking for is something that's going to be in your personality for the span of your life. So they're testing some things that are forever, basically. So it ends up boiling down to 5 factors. And in fact, today, almost all personality tests are based on the 16 primary traits that then were factor analyzed and basically boiled down to 5 global factors. So almost all personality tests now are based on these things. Basically, it's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, which of course we're very familiar with, neuroticism, and agreeableness. And in high school or college, you remember that as it was a acronym that was taught as OCEAN or canoe.
You know, that's really wild. I mean, when you think of, I'm just thinking of the wide range of people that I know and all the different kind of quirks and things that obviously you kind of measure in your head just as a human being responding to another human being. And I find it kind of bizarre that you can take all of those different amazing people and boil them down into 5 different types of people.
I agree. I don't think it's possible to break it down to just 5 attributes, but that's exactly what personality tests do. In fact, the DISC, which is one of the most popular used, not just in franchising, but across the board, the Myers-Briggs, which we're all very familiar with, or the Kear's temperament disorder, these are all big assessment tools that are used across companies consistently that are based on this big 5 model.
So we talked a little bit about the 16-point questionnaire and all of that, but what about the Kear's temperament disorder and the Myers-Briggs? They claim to be different. Are they really?
You know, it depends how you look at it, honestly, Bonnie. The Myers-Briggs type indicator actually predates Kristall's work, which we talked about with the 16 personality factor questionnaire, which then was sort of boiled down to the just 5 particular points. However, if you look at the Myers-Briggs more closely, you will see that 4 of the 5 big 5 dimensions are right in both the Kear's temperament disorder and the Myers-Briggs. For instance, in the MBTI, the EI scale, or the introvert versus extrovert scale, clearly corresponds with introvert, extrovert, and the big 5, right? And the what they call the SN scale, which is sensor intuitor, corresponds directly with openness to experience, which is one of the 5. And the Kear's temperament is very, very similar to the Myers-Briggs. It uses those same 4 scales. Now, the Myers-Briggs clearly, even if you go to the website, will tell you they are different, that they are actually a preference test. The Kear's temperament suggests that's what they are, too, a preference test, and that they do not measure traits, ability, or character. And it comes from Dr. Carl Jung's theories, and if you know Dr. Carl Jung, he was a colleague, a protege of Sigmund Freud, which in and of itself should tell you something. But nonetheless, Jung was virtually alone among the psychologists of the 20th century. He rejected the theory of human psychological development. He did not believe we evolved. He did not believe that nature versus nurture philosophy and personality, that parents and society and situation did not affect someone's personality. So Jung was basically suggested we were just sort of predestined through some universal psychic disposition that we had, that we arrived, and any kind of nurturing or any kind of societal influence had nothing to do with our personality. We were just going to be that way as we were born. And that is how the Myers-Briggs and the Kersey temperament disorder is based. It is based on Jung's work. The work of Cattell and others that came a little bit later brought in this nature versus nurture argument that society does, in fact, right? You mentioned earlier that you behave differently in certain situations. So we are affected by the nurturing or the societal or the parental influences.
So they're saying that axe murderers are born, not made, right?
Exactly. Well, that's a good point, honey. That's a good point. Come on. We know that that's not true. We know that that's not true, that the environment that they were raised in and the values that they were instilled in them as children has them grow up there. So it's an argument that is ridiculous, but you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised how many companies use the Myers-Briggs and the Kersey temperament disorder as a way to determine if this prospective franchisee was born a franchisee. A franchisee. Right. The nurture versus nature. And this argument's going to go on for another 100 years, I'm sure.
Yeah, probably.
But in the 5-element or 5-factor process, which we call the Big 5 in personality, it's almost 50-50.
Having said that, there are some legitimate uses for these tests, right?